Hello, hello, my little stitchies. Happy Monday. Oh my goodness. So, how are you guys? Rhetorical question, right? Um, Thank you, Druid. Hi, Robin. Marianne. You are so generous. Thank you so much. Marianne has gifted 5 tier 1 subs, and I noticed some names here. So if those of you who are named in the sub gift, if you're not here, Marianne is the one that gifted you. So um, hopefully they'll see that when they go back and watch. So thank you, Marianne. Hey, Kate, just here for a short time. Better here for a short time than never. So all good, all good. So today's gonna be a short one, you guys. The snow. I'll say no more because I'm sure about half of you are dealing with this snow. So I gotta get back out there. Yeah, my snow it's not as bad as they said. It's like, I don't know. My house, because I'm kind of like sort of towards the end of a street and the wind kind of howls down the street. The wind hasn't been bad, but it drifts just enough that it's really hard to tell. I would say it's between 8 and 12 inches, what I have out there. What I looked at like late last night just to see how much snow we had gotten, they were saying my area got about 6.5, but I think it was more than that. In any event, it's just all of the pain in the rear problems of, they plow the road, and I'm on a major road that goes up to Pennsylvania. It's a snow emergency route. So they plow that. It pushes all of the snow up against our driveways. And then somebody will come along and snow blow the sidewalk. Bless my neighbors who do that. We also have a snow blower. My son's out there with it right now. And oh my goodness, a treasure train. What is that? How's that different than a hype train? Oh my goodness. Okay. We got some kind of ridiculous. We got some kind of ridiculous emoji. Okay, now an ad's gonna start, so sorry for you guys maybe out there that are not on a sub, falling into an ad hole. I'm sorry. Anyway, so the good citizens who snow blow, we've got a nice clear way. There's lots of people that walk. We've got a number of bus stops. I always worry about them when it's snowy and icy. My son rides the bus, so I have a distinct interest in that. But the problem with the snow blowers on the sidewalk is it throws snow into that pile that the plows have created. So for us to enter or exit our driveway, we have like a mountain, and my back is already killing me just from doing the front steps. My husband is still out of town right now. My son's out there. Ugh. It's not the end of the world, but my gosh, it's such a pain. So yeah, I feel everybody's pain. We'll get through it, Worst case, I think about the blizzard of 96 is probably the one that sticks in my head the most as the freaking most awful, terrible, snow that I feel like I've dealt with in my entire life as an adult. And it was fine. It took like 6 months to melt, but it was fine. We'll get through it. You gotta get that snowplow pushed out. Yes. That's the thing. I've looked at it. Our temperatures are supposed to be consistent all through the week, but it doesn't necessarily help that temperature, that consistent temperature is below freezing. So, yeah, the snow. And those of you that are not in the snow zone, you're so lucky. But I also know you guys have your own set of weather challenges at different times. So anyway, so that, and I always say we're apolitical around here, but, yeah, this weekend was really hard. And I won't get into it. I'm not, I've always maintained that this is not going to be, I'm not going to spew politics here. Everything is about politics now, but I kind of drew a line in the sand on Instagram, if you haven't seen it, and it posted to the Cake TV web Facebook page. If you haven't seen those and you're curious, feel free to look. If we're not on the same page, I still love you. But that's for you to decide whether you want to stick around. So I feel like I got a lot of thumbs up. a lot of hearts for people I recognize as being part of this community and part of the quilt nerding community. So I feel like we're all in pretty good company here. But the one thing I will say before I move on is when I heard about the shooting on Saturday in Minnesota, um, I went online first. I didn't look for any kind of news or news stories or anything. I went online because, unfortunately or fortunately, citizen videos are often much more relevant. And we can tell from those citizen videos really what's happening more so than we can tell from what is on the news. Um, I thoroughly agree with investigations and taking things slowly, et cetera, et cetera. However, what I saw in those videos and then what I heard spokespersons for our federal government say within minutes, like, the man's body wasn't cold yet. And they, within minutes, were calling him a domestic terrorist. And this man was an ICU nurse for the VA. You know, I have no words. So anyway, I'll be honest, I just didn't want to stream today. But I think it's important, you guys give me as much far more than I give you, I think. So here we are. And I want to read a couple things. It's just going to be a few selections. What I will say, the books, I don't have the dust jacket on because the dust jacket's a hot mess, but we were literally split down the middle. The people who I asked, which book shall we read first? Either this one or Avril Colby's Patchwork Quilts book, and it was literally split down the middle for the people that told me. So I thought, let's start with the short one. This book is very short. I could probably read a chunk of it today. The text is a little bit small. My phone is going off. The text is a little bit small. However, I do believe that we'll get through this quickly. More than half of this book is pictures. And I'll go in and it also has like the huge list of quilt names, quilt pattern names, which I'm not gonna read through. Like I think we did this with Marie Webster's book, I think, had the list, and Finley's book may have too, Ruth Finley's book. But anyway, so we can skip that stuff. But yeah, so we're gonna start with this one. It shouldn't take us long. That said, I will not be here on Thursday. It's nothing bad. My husband will be home and there's some stuff that we have to take care of together. So, I want to make sure we have enough time to do that because he'll only be here for a short time. So I'm just going to say like Thursday will be really tough if I don't just cancel the stream. So no stream on Thursday. We'll be back the following Monday though. Possibly from another location. My husband asked me if I wanted to come to Virginia with him for a little while, and I'm thinking about it. I'm thinking of taking him up on it. Depending on how our weather goes, because we're supposed to get more snow this weekend, and I worry about just leaving my son here to deal with it all. So anyway, everything's in flux. It always is. Gosh darn it, 2026. I think I want a refund. I think I'd like to just go ahead and go on back to 2025, much as we hated it. All right, let's get into it. So, yeah, Marianne, right? A do-over? I feel like, I don't know. I feel like we could have a do-over on 2025, and, I got to do a lot of fun things in 2025, but there were some tough times too. But tis what it is. So the first thing I'm going to read, you might recognize this. Oops. Go. Okay. You might recognize this. This is the Quilters Newsletter magazine that we were looking at last week. There's one article in here I didn't read, or one piece in here I didn't read. And I will warn you, it is sad. It's a bit of a tearjerker, but not in a terrible way. It's just one of those like, like family legacy kind of story. So I wanted to read it. I ended up we didn't have time the other day. And, oh, Druid. I know. I know. I keep thinking like rolling backwards, like, 2025 is kind of a pile of poo. Also, 2024, that was a really bad year for me. I had, multiple loved ones die in 2024. 2023, I don't remember it much. I'm not sure about 2023. 2022 and before, well, that was the 3 years of COVID. So, like, what are you going to do with that? Um, yeah. We have to hang on the things that bring us sanity. And, here's something, like, again, I said I wasn't going to, like, really talk about it, but I think there are two things I want to make a point of. And I sort of started saying this last Thursday, and I want to say it again, maybe in better terms. Let me go back to me. I said that, sometimes sometimes we just kind of stay in our lane of what we care about, because of the polycrisis version of our life. It's something, and this kind of all ties together. Something that I did see on social media over the weekend, and of course, following the shooting in Minnesota, was a lot of like, oh, you care about this, you need to care about this too. Or, you mentioned their name, what about this name? 2026, but what about all the people in 2025? So here's the thing. People have only so much capacity. And so we right, wrong, or indifferent, we reach our breaking point about things, and some of us reach our breaking point and want to speak out like that. I'm a little bit of a wait and see person. I like to see, and that's a problem too. I know. Because I don't shoot from the hip. I don't act quickly a lot of times. I'm a wait and see. Um so I think that it's important to realize that not everybody has the capacity to protest, to take this really hard stance, line in the sand, position on topics. Um, there's a lot of reasons why people don't speak out, and it is unfair, I think, to put that on anybody else. If you choose to protest something, if you choose to speak out about something and how you feel about it, that is your prerogative. And, m- might you lose followers, friends? Yeah, and we've been dealing with this for like, what, a decade now? you know, um, but I think that, and I see a lot of, there's one very prominent quilts influencer out there yesterday who posted, and now is the time, she says, again, to look at businesses, and if they haven't taken a stance, then you need to unfollow, you need to stop buying your quilt supplies, yada, yada, yada. Here's the thing. If I come up against a company I've done business with and they literally have a sign hanging up of something, they have taken a public stance about something and I don't agree with it, then you better believe I will spend my money elsewhere. We vote with our money. And, if that means people lose business, they lose business because they put their thoughts out there. But somebody who remains silent, again, there are a lot of reasons why people remain silent, and silence is not agreement with the wrong side. Silence is not, I don't think silence should be, people who remain silent should not be attacked. And you'll never change my mind about that, because there's a lot of reasons why people don't speak up, or people don't protest, or people don't take this like loud public stance on things. And some of this again goes along with our polycrisis. I would imagine I have some very good close friends in Minnesota, who right now are in a lot of pain and fear and are very upset. And I think yelling at them and asking them why they care so much about what's happening in their city, if they didn't care about Palestine, or they didn't care about Israel, or they don't care about Venezuela, or they don't care about the Ukraine. And, I think that is an unfair expectation to put on people. We all do our best. So I guess I don't have anything, like, I realize that this is not, this is not coherent. This is just kind of babbling, but, um, you know, lots of feelings and things are going through my mind, and I just see stuff that really bothers me. Um, the things people say and the things people do out there in response to, um, very, very emotional and sensational events. Um, so I'll leave it there. Done. Soapbox is away. We're gonna fall into the fantasy land of quilts. Oh, and side note, don't come at me, and I know none of you will do this, but don't come at me with, why can't we just look at quilts, and why can't they just be pretty, and why does everything have to be political? Here's the thing. You guys know, I've said this a million times. Quilts are documents. Quilts have always been political. Fabric has always been political. We have read all the books that prove it historically, guys. Everybody who's been here listening to the books we read and reading them yourselves, checking them out, asking questions, laughing when they're silly. You guys have read, by virtue of me, you guys have read all about the history of fabric and its politicalization over the millennia. So, that said, I do like to fall into the fantasy world of quilting sometimes. And really, I'll be honest, because I consider quilting as, like, it's more of my profession, in terms of research and stuff. I have to be honest, I played with miniatures all weekend because that is something that's not business related. It is a pure, it's literally just, pure delight. And I think I've mentioned this before. It's like you have to fall upon the things that keep you sane and that keep you together. So, back to Quilters Newsletter Magazine. And as a reminder, this was September 1975 and issue 71. And this short little piece I'm going to read is called Hannah's Quilt by Leslie G. Durbecker. And this is what she says. My grandmother used to tell me about a very special quilt that had belonged to her great-grandmother. She said it was known as Hannah's quilt and that it had been part of great-grandma's life for 62 years. In the year 1830, the marriage of Hannah Elizabeth Havens and John Joseph Smith was recorded in a small village, Clifton, near Bristol, England. Shortly afterwards, they sailed to Canada, settling in the Niagara area of southern Ontario. Filled with all the enthusiasm and optimism of a young bride, Hannah Elizabeth determined to create for her family a continuing record of their lives. As soon as she could, she started a quilt which was to be that pictorial record. She began by embroidering the date and place of their wedding on the first square of the quilt, enclosed by a circlet of flowers, 2 of which were made from scraps of material from her wedding dress. The second square recorded, by an embroidered drawing, the couple's first home. The third square, the birth of their first child, Elizabeth. So the quilt was formed year by year, recording not only births and deaths, but harvests, natural disasters, crop failures, additions to the farm, milestones of the children, and local history. As each section of the quilt was completed, Hannah finished the sides with a scalloped edge. The end was always left open. Hannah lived to see and record the births of 22 grandchildren and 12 of her 53 great-grandchildren. The last square she completed was in celebration of her 80th birthday. She died 2 weeks later, and after the funeral, according to her wishes, her daughters finally closed and edged Hannah's quilt. In memory of Hannah, her quilt was displayed at many county fairs and considered a marvel of design and workmanship. Because of its extraordinary length, a special rig was designed to hang it from the rafters. Doesn't say how long this thing was, but I picture it being like, the scarf that people knit forever, and it's really long. It wasn't for a bad. Many local historians corroborated information by examining Hannah's quilt. It became a point of local interest to visitors in the area, and mention of visits to Hannah's quilt appeared in the correspondence of historically notable people. Excitement and drama surround the closing history of Hannah's quilt. In December of the year 1897, a disastrous fire occurred during family celebration. All the children were quickly ushered outside as soon as the fire was discovered, except the youngest baby who was upstairs sleeping. The frantic father made a dash for the child, throwing Hannah's quilt around himself and the baby for protection from the flames and smoke. They just reached the front door when the quilt caught on something and was torn from them with a terrific jerk. They made it to safety just as the building collapsed. Although Hannah's quilt was destroyed by the fire, its story is passed on from generation to generation. Only when her last descendant is gone will Hannah's quilt cease to exist. So, as sad as it is to have lost this quilt, and I suppose, I suspect some of this is kind of apocryphal. Like, if this quilt is so long they needed to have a special rig to hang it, where is it in the house that this man could just grab it and put it around him and the baby? I feel like that last part might just be like what the family has kind of put in there as the reason why the quilt is no longer around. I mean, it certainly could have been destroyed in this fire, but I don't know. This last little bit kind of feels apocryphal. But in any event, I think this is really a lovely, a lovely description of this family quilt. And I think about, all the reasons why people make quilts. And my mom sent me something this weekend. It's kind of long, and it has popular music behind it, or I would play it. I get enough copyright strikes as it is. Or copyright mutes. I haven't gotten a strike in a while. But anyway, it's this man talking about using his great grandmother's quilt, and how he still uses it. He still lets his children lay on it out in the yard. And I'm just like cringing a little bit, but everything he said about the reason why this woman made this quilt, the fact that the family knows all of these things about the quilt, it's a very strong story that is passed through the family. Those are the stories I think that matter about quilts, and those are the things that we have to keep alive, because these women may never they may never be known without these stories. And certainly Hannah Elizabeth Havens, so she would have been Hannah Elizabeth Smith when she came here, or to Canada. Do you think her name would ever be known if it wasn't for this quilt story? So I thought it was cool. Still a little bit of a tearjerker, but I think still a good story. All right, next, let us look at this. So I'm just going to put up one of the plates. So this little book, this is a reprint that I got. So I don't have the original cover of it. However, the booklet is in Dr. Dunton's. The original is in Dr. Dunton's collection, and I have looked at it. And it's kind of like... it's a few plates and literally like a couple paragraphs, and they're sort of redundant. But I want to read it to you because of all the things we've read, you start to see over and over where each of these people are pulling information from. Now, this thing was written, I think, in 1932. This is by Eric McLagan or McLagan. And, presumably he is somebody important at the V&A at that time. I can find no notes in here that say who he is. And, like, I don't know if there was an exhibit. I don't know. So, but I just want to read it because, looking at this from 1932 and thinking about the books that we've read, like in the 40s and 50s, like Dunton is one of them. And I can tell you, I think that some of what is here is not plagiarized, very closely reworded, paraphrased in Dunton's book, but also many of these other writers. Now, the people before 1932, Mavis Fitz-Randolph is like right around the time of this book. But anybody before that, Elizabeth Hake, and of course Marie Webster, Ruth Finley, I feel like their information is the same. So it's kind of like what is the origin of the information is curious. Who was the first person to write about it? And I'll tell you exactly what I'm talking about when we read it. So let's go ahead and get started. Like I said, this is a weird one. It's literally only a couple pages long. And this is one of the pictures in here. Some of them are terrible. Part of it is the fact that it's reprinted. Probably literally reprinted like from a photocopy. But I thought this was one of the cool plates. It's dated 1703. At best I can tell, this is like a griffin, right? Is it a griffin that's it's like the head of a hawk or an eagle and the body is of a lion, right? So that's what this is. 1703. There's several little look in here there, and I don't think anything is a full quilt. I think they're all just details of quilts. They are very Welsh. There's the arcs and the cables and all that kind of stuff. So yeah. All right. So quilting. Quilting can refer either to the process of creating a quilt or to sewing, or to the sewing of two or more layers of material together to make a thicker, padded material. Quilting, as the process of creating a quilt, refers specifically to the joining of layers as one of its steps, along with designing, piecing, applique, binding, and other stages. A quilter is the name given to someone who works at quilting. Quilting can be done by hand, by sewing machine, or by a specialist long-arm quilting system. This preface is clearly not written by Eric McLagan. His last name is spelled Maclagan. I want to say it's McLaughlin, but I don't think that is it. It's McLagan. Okay. The word quilt comes from the Latin culcita, meaning a large stuffed sack, but it came into the English language from the French word quilte, C-U-I-L-T-E. The origins of quilting remain unknown, but sewing techniques of piecing, applique, and quilting have been used for clothing and furnishings in diverse parts of the world for several millennia. The earliest known quilted garment is depicted on the carved ivory figure of a pharaoh of the Egyptian First Dynasty about 3400 BC. And I feel like it might have been Avril Colby where we looked at that. And this whole definition of quilt, quiltita, quilte, I mean, that's true. those words are for real, and I think the etymology is absolutely correct. But where was that first written? Because this literally the words, from the Latin culcita, and it came into the English language from the French. Like, that is literally in so many quilting books. But it's not coming from this, because there are books that said it that predate this one. Quilting has been part of the needlework tradition of Europe from about the 5th century CE. Early objects contain Egyptian cotton, which may indicate the Egyptian and Mediterranean trade provided a conduit for the technique. Quilted objects were relatively rare in Europe until approximately the 12th century. However, when quilted bedding and other items appeared after the return of the Crusaders from the Middle East. The medieval quilted gambeson, accaton, and arming doublet, remember? Those were definitely, Avril Colby talked about those, absolutely. These were garments worn under or instead of armor or armor of mail or plate armor. These developed into the later quilted doublet worn as part of fashionable European male clothing from the 14th to the 17th century. Quilting clothing began to be generally used in the 14th century, when quilted doublets and armor worn in France, Germany, and England, and quilted tunics in Italy. Typical quilting is done with 3 layers: the top fabric or quilt top, batting or insulating material, and backing material. The quilter's hand or sewing machine passes the needle and thread through all layers and then brings the needle back up. This process is repeated across the entire area where quilting is wanted. A rocking, straight, or running stitch is commonly used, and these stitches can be purely functional or decorative and elaborate. Likewise, the usage of the finished quilts can be purely for artistic purposes or for more functional reasons, items such as bedspreads, clothing, and various textile products. What I would say about this is a rocking, straight, or running stitch. That makes it sound like those are 3 different types of stitches. A straight or a running stitch can, in theory, be the same thing. A running stitch is the proper term. A straight stitch just really means not a zigzag. A straight stitch could also be a back stitch to some degree. It's the running stitch that goes forward. And the rocking is the technique. A rocking stitch it's just a technique. It's that technique of using, the quilt is taut and you're using your finger to do that rocking movement to load the needle up with the quilt. I can't do it. I've mentioned that many times. Many types of quilting exist today. The two most widely used are hand quilting and machine quilting. Machine quilting is the process of using a home sewing machine or a long arm machine to sew the layers together. With the home sewing machine, the layers are tacked together before quilting. This involves laying the top, batting, and backing out on a flat surface and either pinning, using large safety pins, or tacking the layers together. Long arm quilting involves placing the layers to be quilted on a special frame. The frame has bars on which the layers are rolled, keeping these together without the need for tacking or pinning. A long arm machine is moved across the fabric, but in contrast with the home sewing machine, the fabric is moved through it. Clear as mud, right? And I will also mention this part that I'm reading here. This is the preface to this book. This was written in 2013 by a company named Reed Books Ltd. They have a copyright notice on it, but it doesn't tell me who wrote this. And I've seen this exact piece written and plopped into other books. So I think it's these reprinters, and they've written this. So just to be clear, this is from 2013. Hey Kenny, did you get snow? I think you did. Did I see that you had posted something about snow on Facebook? I can't remember. So hand quilting is the process of using a needle and thread to sew a running stitch by hand across the entire area to be quilted. This binds the layers together. A quilting frame or hoop is often used to assist in holding the piece being quilted off the quilter's lap. A quilter can make one stitch at a time by first driving the needle through the fabric from the right side, then pushing it back up through the material from the wrong side to complete the stitch. This is called a stab stitch. Another option is called a rocking stitch, where the quilter has one hand, usually with a finger wearing a thimble, on top of the quilt, while the other hand is located beneath the piece to push the needle back up. A third option is called loading the needle and involves doing 4 or more stitches before pulling the needle through the cloth. The process of hand quilting is currently experiencing a resurgence worldwide, especially with the growing popularity of various home crafts. We hope that the reader is inspired by this book to try some quilting of their own. Enjoy. Driving the needle. Yes. It's like you need a hammer. Drive it down in there and then push it back up. Okay. So that is the introduction provided by Reed Books Ltd, I guess, again. And it says the British Library cataloging in publication data. A catalog record for this book is available from the British Library. So again, the actual book itself is in shows up in Dr. Dunton's collection. I feel like it was fairly new when he got his hands on it. So there's one on embroidery. There might have been one on like white work or something like that, and then there was this one. So here's the prefatory note, meaning the preface, I suppose, by Eric McLagan. This poor man, I'm probably saying his name wrong. He says, these notes on quilting with plates of details of some of the best examples in the museum have been issued in the hope that they will be of service to the women's institutes and other bodies. Remember the Women's Institute? That was important. Elizabeth Hake mentioned it. Mavis Fitz-Randolph mentioned it, but she worked for them. And I believe Avril Colby mentioned them. So big deal in the UK. So women's institutes and other bodies which are doing so much to support this traditional English art. They are not, however, intended to be exhaustive or to serve as a guide to technique. June 1932, Eric McLagan. All right. Some of this is going to be like set over. It's kind of the exact same stuff right out of the opening, and it's why I don't understand why they put that in there. But anyway, so here's the official introduction. The word quilt is derived from the Latin culcita, which means a stuffed sack, mattress, or cushion. The Oxford Dictionary, and I believe it's the Oxford English Dictionary, thank you, Eric, defines a quilt as an article of bed furniture consisting essentially of two large pieces of woven material having a layer of some soft substance, such as wool, flock, or down, placed between them. In later use, a coverlet of similar make, especially one in which the lining is kept in place by stitches or lines of stitching passing through the whole, the medieval quilt point or counterpoint. The use of the word can be traced back as far as the 13th century at least, and so the making of quilts is undoubtedly an old traditional craft in the British Isles. And we definitely saw that in Avril Colby's book. So Kenny, was that an outgrowth of the women's exchanges? I don't know as much about the women's exchanges. I think it was to some degree. I think the Women's Institute, though, they came about sort of during a period of time, Europe and UK kind of, yeah. So the Women's Institute was kind of like, I liken it to like the WPA kind of, during the time period when it was active, in the UK. Things were bad in Europe at the same time we were having troubles, but our depression affected them to some degree, but they really had like kind of reconstruction from World War One going on. So like they kind of had different hard times, you know. So I think that the Women's Institute was kind of a response to that and getting out into some of these rural areas. So very much like what the WPA did during the Depression here in the US, making sure that people had jobs, um, or training them to do jobs that were useful. So I think that's kind of what it is. And I think that some form of the Women's Institute still exists today. I think I think their name's something different. I do know, I know last time you were here, we talked about this, and I think it was because we might have still been reading Mavis Fitzrandolph. I can't remember, or we had just started Elizabeth Hake, I think. And you provided a link, I think, to one of those women's exchanges here in the US, like in Baltimore, I think, if I remember correctly. I looked at the link you sent, like right after I ended the stream. And yeah, that was something that was, here in Baltimore until not terribly long ago. And what it was replaced with is something that's community oriented. So, even if they don't exist anymore, all is not lost. There's something that replaced them. So yeah, there are all of these things that, they come and go. Although I think the Women's Institute is still doing something. Okay. The spelling of the word varies much, and forms such as Quilts, so Cowltes, or this word, Qwhiltez, are not uncommon. In medieval and later, that sounds like something Chaucer would have said. In medieval or later inventories, quilts are very often mentioned. Among the possessions of Robert Dudley, Earl of Leicester, at Kenilworth in 1584. Oh my God, I'm so dyslexic with numbers. So 1584 were several elaborate quilts, including one described as a fair quilt of crimson satin, VJ breadths, and IIJ yards. I don't know. VJ, what is that? 6 breadths? I don't know. These are 1500s measurements. They're not even imperial. Okay. 3/4 of a nail deep, all lozenged over with silver twist, in the midst of a cinquefoil, within a garland of ragged staves, fringed round about with a small fringe of crimson silk, lined through with white fustian. I'm almost positive that was quoted in I'm almost certain that was quoted in probably Avril Colby's book. Yeah, Kenny said, yeah, I would think that the Institute is a government, like a, yeah, it is a government community supported thing. Um, yeah, I don't think it wasn't something that was like a grassroots effort. It was top down, I think, yeah. Apart from the British Isles, quilting has long been popular in most European countries, and one of the best and oldest known examples of quilting is the splendid Sicilian quilt with scenes from the early life of Tristan, part of which is in the museum and part in the Bargello at Florence. And I think it is all together now, right? I could be wrong. Quilting has also been known and practiced from an early period in Oriental countries. Remember, this is 1932, all right? Especially India, Persia, Turkestan, and the neighboring lands of the Nearer East, as well as in the Mohammedan regions of North, East, and West Africa. Quilted garments were often worn under armor, and in some cases, especially for light troops, thick quilting was used instead of metal armor. Now we know where Avril Colby got all of her armor mentions. It was in this book. um, so Kenny has given us some. Okay, so a nail unit of measurement is the penny system, donated by the letter D. Okay, which indicates length with a higher number meaning a longer nail, originating from the historic price of 100 nails in pennies. Denari. Yes, denari. That's a. Is that Latin? I think that's Latin. Nails are also measured by gauge for thickness. Lower gauge equals thicker, and by standard inches millimeters for length. Though penny sizes like 8D or 2.5 inches, I'm sorry, 8D for 2.5 inches, 16D for 3.5 inches remain common in the US for wood construction. Ah, who knew? Oh my gosh, you learn something new every day. So, I think that was in Elizabeth Hake's book. I was struggling with that, where it was mentioned that letter D, and I was like, is that pence? It's penny. I wasn't too terribly off, but I think I just didn't understand how it was being used. Thank you for that, Kenny. You have demystified something. Although still made it more complicated because I'm like, oh no, now we know what it is, but who can remember? Six pennies is 2.5 inches. I'm sorry, 8 is 2.5 inches, but 16 is 3.5 inches. So 8 times 2, 2.5 is not 5. That's some quilt math for you. All right. In England, the popularity of quilting reached its zenith in the 17th and 18th centuries. In the early part of the 17th century, under James I and Charles I, quilted suits of satin, doublet, and breeches were worn, and a fine example of this type is in the museum. Towards the end of the century and in the 18th century, under Queen Anne and the first two Georges, quilted petticoats of satin were a part of fashionable dress. When it said X nails thick, that just clicked in your mind. Yeah, yeah. It still makes no sense to me how 8 to 16 is 2.5 to 3.5. It just I mean, I'm sure like it does make sense in the way that this measurement is created, but yeah, in my American imperial measurement brain, it's not commuting there. Okay. Quilted bed furniture of all kinds was made, especially large coverlets, which were often enriched with embroidery. Quilted jackets and waistcoats were also known. At the end of the century, under George III, quilting was sometimes combined with patchwork, but with the 19th century, this combination went out of favor. So interesting. Quilting, however, survived and still survives today in certain districts. Do you remember what those districts might be? You're going to recognize them when I read them. Yorkshire, which is northern part of England, Durham and Northumberland, the northern part of England, and South Wales. Here, the art has been carried on from time immemorial, and mothers have regularly handed on this succession to their daughters. And in these districts, therefore, quilting may well be considered as one of the few examples of a genuine survival of peasant art in this country. Consequently, the endeavors now being made under the auspices of the Federation of Women's Institutes to preserve and encourage the art deserve all success. In America, the earlier settlers of New Amsterdam, of New England, and of Virginia and the Carolinas brought the art with them from their old homes in Holland and England. Later, the westward expansion of settlement carried quilting into Kentucky and Tennessee, and in the mountains of those states, and of Virginia, and of the Carolinas, the art is still practiced. As already given in the definition, the essential nature of a piece of quilting is that it should consist of 2 thicknesses of material, wool, silk, or linen, which are stitched together. In all countries, the stitching is usually done in backstitch. The running stitch, which is allied to backstitch, is also used and forms a pattern and outline. Okay. He is saying that in all countries, the stitching is usually done in backstitch. We know this is absolutely not true. In Wales, they backstitched. And I think it is not because of it's a style. I think the backstitching, particularly with Welsh quilts, is because of the thickness. Like they're quilting with wool. Their fabrics are wool, and it's not like this fine gossamer like clothing wool. It's like a sturdier, heavier wool. It's like light suiting is what I guess like the thickness of it would be. That's difficult if you're just doing running stitches. You end up with like big giant stitches, but if you're doing a back stitch, you can make them smaller. So I think that's what the back stitch was about. But to say that all countries do back stitch, wrong. I need that buzzer sound, right? Oh, Kenny's got more trivia. Historically, a nail was also a unit for cloth, a 1/16 of a yard, about 2.25 inches, or a unit of weight, 1/16 of a hundredweight. That helped a lot, Kenny. Thanks. A hard enough time with figuring out like yard measurements. I remember when I worked at Joann Fabrics, I'd always I'd look at the cheat sheet, right? Have the, what the decimal equivalent of like 1/8 of a yard is. You have to do that for remnants. We didn't have a lot of people buying. Context matters. Well, no kidding. I would hate to be a weights and measurements person who has to deal with all that stuff. Okay. The pattern is made still more effective by padding with wool cotton or some similar downy material, or even a simple cotton cloth between the 2 layers. For the upper layer, the material employed is usually a finer texture than that used for the underlayer or lining. This is illustrated by the Earl of Leicester's quilt, which had an upper layer of crimson satin and was lined through with white fustian. And that would have been like a wool sort of fabric. Occasionally, notably in English quilting of the early 18th century, the padding is omitted and the 2 layers of material alone are stitched together. Counterpane, right? In addition, or coverlets, in addition to the pattern formed by the quilting stitch, a quilt is often still further ornamented by the addition of embroidery or patchwork. Embroidery was a fashionable ornament to the quilts of the earlier 18th century, and to judge by the Earl of Leicester's and similar inventories, quite common in the 16th and 17th centuries for rich quilts that have now perished. Applique decoration is as well known. Applique decoration as well is known and seems to have been also used in the gorgeous 16th century quilts, now known to us only by the household inventories. Patchwork is confined apparently to those of the later part of the 18th or early 19th century. In American patchwork, quilts have been and still are quite popular in the districts already mentioned, meaning the states that he's mentioned. The illustrations here given are not intended to be exhaustive, but merely to indicate some of the better examples of quilting in the museum, especially those which best repay close study and analysis. And that is the entire book. And like I said, I'm not going to waste your time with some of these pictures because they're horrible. They don't tell us anything fairly useful. But like I said, this one I thought was really cool. It just is a very cool, like as an illustration, it's cool. And like, I just look at this and I think how modern, but it's 1703. I know lots of quilters, like, the Harry Potter fans or the fantasy and sci-fi fans who would just love this, as a quilting motif. So pretty cool. All right. Moving right along. And so, American Quilts by Elizabeth Wells Robertson. Now, here's something, and I need to research this person. I don't think she's who. There was a woman who corresponded with Florence Pito and Dr. Dunton, and her name was Elizabeth Robertson. I'm pretty sure this is not the same person, because the date when this book was written should have been a topic of conversation between them all, 1948, and I know she wasn't writing a book then, so I don't think that this is the same person. But Elizabeth Robertson, it's a pretty ordinary name. I actually have an Elizabeth Robertson in my family because the name Robertson is in my family. So this book, written by Elizabeth Wells Robertson, it is published by the Studio Publications Inc., which is one I've not heard of. Its copyright is 1948. And it's 151 pages long, but more than half of that is black and white pictures. So we'll look at those, more when we're actually done with the meat of the book. But this is one of the, I think this is like the, I don't know, what do you call this? Like one of the fly leaf. Like it's just that kind of random page that doesn't have anything on it except this. So I thought this was neat. This could be a quilting pattern. This could be a Baltimore album quilt pattern, right? So yeah, and there's a couple of these here in the book. There's another one I like very much, that's got birds and stuff. There's also something really cool, and let me go back to my main screen so you can see this better. I didn't take pictures of this. So within the book, there's some really cute illustrations, but there's this happening. So this is a book or a page of text, but you've got this red pattern like superimposed there. And I mean, even with like quilting stitches. So it's really cool. It's a really cool like device, I guess. Some of it, that I don't know that you'd necessarily be using this as a pattern per se, but it's kind of a cool thing to, that they did. So yeah, I really like that. It's pretty neat. Here's more. Both of these pages. They're pretty neat. And it doesn't make it hard to read the print or anything, so yeah. Pre-decimal currency in the UK. Look, I still struggle with European money and UK money. I mean, you would think that, I guess my problem with that kind of, with money in other places is you're constantly trying to do, or at least I am, constantly trying to do the exchange rate. And that's what makes it difficult, I didn't even try to do cents, like, like here's dollar money, paper money. It's not paper money. Okay. So we are reading American Quilts by Elizabeth Wells Robertson, copyright 1949. I'm sorry, 1948. 1948. And this is part 1, beginnings. A quilt is anything made of 2 pieces of material with padding between and held together with stitches. Have we just heard that? Yes, we have. But were we to end our definition on so utilitarian a note, we should altogether miss the fascinating story of a craft which inherently touches upon all aspects of the life of the people of early America. If we first take into consideration how American quilts came into being, we see them as the practical necessity they were in the earliest days. If we next consider the conditions under which they were made, we understand the struggle of the pioneer women, lightened occasionally by the gay social event of the quilting bee. Next, through the materials sewn together on the quilt tops, we can visualize clothing fabrics of the women of the early days and the patterns in the weaves. Here we must also touch upon the growth of the industry which produced these fabrics from raw materials, and in doing so, see the conditions of the workers and the political maneuvers of the time. And lastly, if we look at the quilts themselves, we see what design influences surround the quilt maker and what inspired her to the heights of the artistic expression she achieved. Thus, the complete story of the American quilt would take longer to tell than any of our great grandmother's tales at a quilting party. Yes, we can, however, outline briefly the colorful story that would comprise the background of all the early quilts that might now cover the maple and mahogany beds in our American colonial homes in different parts of the country. So that's a really, really exciting introduction, right? This is 1948, and she has touched on the fact that political maneuvers of the time affected quilts because they affected fabric. Because politics. Bless you, Elizabeth Robertson. And she's also touching on, American colonial. So that we talk about like the colonial revivals in the US, be like 1920s, 1970s. I really kind of think the colonial revival just kind of went all the way through the 20th century. I think there are times when it like blips up, but I think that there's kind of this like constant love of colonial design and such. By visiting areas off the beaten track of our eastern states where people lived in colonial houses, we can still find articles made by the early settlers that are used every day. A visit to an old farmhouse in the lake and mountain districts of Maine, for instance, will reveal that art in the early days of America was not derivative, but indigenous, growing from the hands and hearts of men and women working together to make a beautiful and comfortable place in which to live. America had the good fortune to be settled at the time when handicrafts in England had reached a very high point of development. Although our forefathers brought over with them a great variety of furniture and other household effects, the greater number of early settlers brought only the memory of such pieces, and to a greater or lesser extent, a knowledge of how they were made. Many trained craftsmen brought tools. Others were able only to bring an accurate mental picture of these tools, with the intention of making new ones as soon as they were needed. The important motivating force in all early American crafts was immediate need and the quick response in ideas to meet that need. The objects made, whether they were chairs, beds, or quilts, were of simple strength, fine workmanship, and individual design. To understand all that is connected with the making of these objects, it is necessary to take a brief look at some of the colorful associations. It's necessary to take a brief look at some of the beginnings of our cultural history. We must not forget that American quilts, despite the colorful associations they arouse in us now, were, like all other early crafts, made under tremendous strain and under almost unbelievable hardships. True that. And I think she is sort of she's sort of simplifying we know that some of those beautiful chintz quilts of the late 18th century, and some of the really beautiful pieced quilts of the early 19th century were not made under hardship, at least not their owner's hardship. Some of those quilts and coverlets and bed coverings were made by enslaved people. The women who, quote unquote, were responsible for those quilts and for those enslaved people, took credit for the quilt, or had the quilt in their home. And it was typically not made of scraps. It was made of fabrics that she had procured. So, I still think there's that idea of quilts being like made with love and, their scraps and all that kind of stuff, when really historically that's really only true of like the true pioneers and Depression era and a lot of the 20th century. You guys know the history of quilts. Starting with those chintz quilts, those were simply not, they were fashionable. They were not about utility. They were not about, survival. They were about showing off. So I think it's important to recognize that. Um, Kenny's got all. Copy that down, you guys. So when you go to the UK, you know what you're dealing with. And you've got a pound and all of those pences. um, and the thing is, a pound and a dollar and a penny and a pence. I mean, it's kind of all equivalent, but and so Kenny says, especially with the cottons coming from India, pre-independence, there's a project underway to revive the extinct, unusual species of cotton plants that grew in India that were woven into the very popular sheer muslins of the 18th century. Yeah, and I think some of that, like, artisanal cotton cultivation, I think that has been going on in a number of places for quite some time. I know one example is that Sea Isle cotton, and I have been dying to get my hands on some of those cotton balls. The cotton that I got from North Carolina a couple years ago to do my little cotton experiments. That was, I think, just your like North American cotton, I guess. But yeah, Sea Isle cotton, like, I would try to spin that. I mean, I would never try to spin the cotton I have. And I'm not a spinner. If you're new around here, not a spinner. I know how to spin, but I'm not a spinner. But I would try that Sea Isle cotton because it's supposed to be a really long staple. Also, there's this brown cotton that they grow in somewhere in South America. I want to say it might be like a Peruvian in origin, but I could be completely wrong about that. I read it in oh gosh, the book is called Fabric. I can't remember who the woman wrote it. She's British. She talked about, she traveled and went down there and like begged to be able to try and spin that cotton, and they were like, no, not for you. It's too hard. Okay. In the establishment of the colonies along the Atlantic coast, it is interesting to trace the force which made for successful colonization. The Spaniards, who came first, sailed the Atlantic with avowed purpose of finding great wealth. When these adventurers had acquired treasures enough to satisfy them, most of them returned home. The influences they left behind were isolated and relatively insignificant. The French were largely voyeurs, and they too, voyageurs, not voyeurs. They might think that too. Voyageurs. And they too, with the exception of the Huguenots, were impelled by love of gain and glory. The greatest lasting influence of the Huguenots, of course, is to be found in the South, with New Orleans, this center of the French culture, and in the North, where the results of other colonizations still exist in the province of Quebec. The English who founded Virginia did many interesting things of more permanent value in the history of our country. Many fine estates of the wealthy planters grew from the beginnings of the London Company. And oh gosh, I'm thinking back to my childhood history lessons. I always had to learn about Virginia government. Virginia is a commonwealth, it's not a state, blah 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 blah. Oh, do I remember all the crap about the London Company? This kind of stuff was why I hated history as a child. So we looked at Virginia history, and Virginia history is boring. The early colonization of Virginia for business purposes was colored by the romantic adventures of such men as Hawkins and Drake. The history of Jamestown is characteristic of the spirit of this colonization, and the restoration of Williamsburg, Virginia, gives us an idea of America under a king. Now, that's interesting that she's talking about Jamestown and Williamsburg, because this is the time in which Williamsburg was being like made into what it is. Going from kind of this little historic area into like literally what it is today. It was in the 1940s. I think it was the Rockefellers that gave gave money for that to happen. Hudson Bay Trading Company. Yeah, Hudson Bay Trading Company. I mean, we had stores here in the U.S. I don't know if they left the U.S. Or I don't know. Their U.S. arm doesn't exist anymore. But I remember Hudson Bay Trading. There's actually one across the street from where I used to work. Yeah, they had cool blankets. It's also, I appreciate the fact that she is saying colonization. She's not talking about colonial America. She is using the word colonization. And what are we to do about that now? You know, but I think it is important to acknowledge that, you know, our ancestors came here and colonized. But the real cradle of America, from which most of our society grew, was the simple dwellings along the seacoast of New England, where men and women together had come ashore, filled with strong determination to carry on their own way of life. These rugged Englishmen and women who settled at Plymouth, and the families who came later to Salem, were for the most part as poor in worldly goods as they were firm in purpose. Not only had they left behind them most of the possessions they once owned, but also a country far advanced economically, socially, and culturally. Arriving at the rocky coast of New England in the middle of December, where the cold winds of the Atlantic blew over scrubby growths of oak, pines, and bayberries, they landed to found a colony of their own. It is little wonder that the very first houses to be put up were merely crude shelters. Unfortunately, the first houses at Plymouth have long since disappeared, but as a part of the tercentenary of Salem, which was settled 10 years after Plymouth, a pioneer's village was erected, which was a replica of the windswept wilderness, which was Salem in 1630. These faithful reproductions show the simplicity of the homes from which our American democracy sprang. The first buildings put up by the settlers were sod-roofed dugouts cut into the side of a hill. Now, I don't think that I read you guys The Quilters. In fact, I know I didn't. But the book The Quilters was written in the early 70s, and it was talking to women whose like grandparents had been Texan settlers, and then also even further out west, and they talked about the dugouts there too. And you know, just thinking about like you travel someplace and you've got to dig a hole in the ground to live in. That's some rough conditions. And so, that's the kind of thing that was happening here in the very beginning as well. Another variety of house resembled a wigwam or tent covered with the bark of trees. There was also a square, one-room, shed-like building with a very steep roof covered with thatch. These were the quickest to build. Growth and development were rapid, however, and changes in the houses soon followed. Old houses all along the Atlantic coast, from Boston to Portsmouth and up beyond in Maine, show many interesting characteristics of the early colonial period. Among these were the steep roof and the overhang. The interest in function developed through utilitarian requirements rather than from a period for pure form. In spite of this, or perhaps because of it, fine form resulted, and the products were dynamic and purposeful. Among the men who built these houses, there was a strong community interest, a natural exchange of ideas, a sharing of tools and materials. At first, the American house was not a castle for the individual, but rather a social and communal expression representing the best that could be constructed under the difficult circumstances. If the lines of these houses were as straight and rigid as the principles of the people, the furniture, in like manner, was as simple as the houses. Because of immediate necessity, a sincerity of purpose was apparent in every table, chest, chair, and bed made. For the making of this furniture, the nearby woods offered an abundant supply of oak, ash, walnut, maple, cedar, and pine. The boards were rough hewn, and each worker planned his own design, the degree of finish depending upon the time he could afford to put into his work and the skill of the worker. For the most part, the very earliest furniture was as devoid of paint as the old houses. The first paint introduced was the dusty red of iron oxide, and this was soon used on pine chests, tables, chairs, and beds. At a much later date, this was covered with a black paint, which was stenciled. As the furniture was used, the black wore off and exposed the dull red paint underneath. And I'm sure you've probably seen that kind of stuff in antique stores, and possibly reproductions have been made to make things look like they were old like that. As transportation increased, ships returning from England brought more and more articles that were greatly needed by the colonists. Sometimes, however, these sailing ships sank in mid ocean, cargo and all. The wills and inventories of some of the victims give a clear idea of the kind of furniture which was most popular then, also the value of it. In 1646, the Great Ship was lost at sea. It was called the Great Ship. Was lost at sea, and in the wills of those who perished were listed their household goods. For instance, George Lamberton had down and feather beds with curtains, valance, and stuff for hangings. The will of another victim disposed of parlor furniture, which consisted of a bedstead, excuse me, a bedstead and trundle bed with curtains and bedding, a great table, a cupboard, a high and a low chair, 6 high stools with green and red covers. The bedroom of this householder had in it a canopy bed with feather bedding, curtains and valance, a little cupboard with drawers, another bed, bedding, and curtains, and 2 chests. In studying such documents, it becomes clear that although much furniture was made in the colonies, a great deal was brought over from England. Sorry. Yeah. Of the various articles of furniture imported, the most expensive and the most important was the bed. The earliest beds were simple in design, built quickly for the maximum comfort with the materials at hand. The native woods were pine, fir, maple, oak, cedar, and hickory. At first, posts were built in each corner with 4 thick boards for the frame. Holes were made in these boards, and heavy ropes or cords were drawn through them, serving as a support for the mattress. These corded beds are still to be found in New England and in the backwoods of other parts of the country. I think that probably every history museum on the East Coast has one of these rope beds. Later on, more intricate designs were introduced based on the English and European styles imported, and soon the 4-poster bed became the fashion. Under those was the trundle bed for the baby of the family. The history of the trundle bed is interesting because it goes back to the Middle Ages when the serf slept in the truckle bed as a protection against any intruder who might seek to molest the master who slept in the great 4-poster. These huge 4-poster beds had rods under the head from which the curtains were hung. The bed covering very often was made from the same material which fashioned the window curtains as well as the bed draperies. Many beds were hung with painted cotton and at a later time with toile de joie. De joie? I've never known how that's pronounced. Toiles from France. All this, of course, was long before material was manufactured in America with which to make these curtains, bedspreads, and quilts. So, oh, Quiltish is here. Hello, hello. Okay, so Hudson Bay Company went out of business last year. Okay, Canadian Tire now owns the rights. Okay, yeah, I thought I had heard somewhere that they weren't in business anymore, but yeah, like I said, the one that I remember was here close to me. It was right across the street from where I worked. It was in a terrible location. It was like right on a traffic circle. Like I'm sure they had trouble getting customers like in there. Anyway, all right, guys. So let me show you. So we were looking at that other picture, or this picture you see right now. Let me show you just a couple of images I didn't take a picture of, but this one, so this is the quilting party. I know we've looked at it. We've seen it. Bertha Stange, remember when I talked about Bertha Stange the other day? She created a little version of it in a quilt. I don't think anybody knows who painted it, though. I don't think it's not attributed to anyone, but it's titled The Quilting Party. It's an oil painting on wood, 1840 to 1850, and it was found in Massachusetts. And according to this, and of course this is 1948, it was at the Museum of Modern Art. But this is the picture. If you've been around for a little bit, it probably looks familiar to you. The Quilting Party. It's a really cute picture, I think. You know, stuff going on. So these are random houses. So this one is a street in Slatersville, Rhode Island, named for Samuel and John Slater. I don't know if this is going to come up more in the book, but you know. And this one is Samuel Slater's Mill at Pawtucket, Rhode Island. So that would matter in terms of fabric. Nice little picture. And this last one that I'll show you is the Sortwell House in Wicasset, Maine. One of the fine houses built by a sea captain in the days when Wicasset, I hope I'm pronouncing it right, by the way, was a flourishing seaport, and materials were brought from England and the continent of Europe to decorate the colonial homes of America. So that. And so if you live on the East Coast, if you visited the East Coast, if you've toured historic homes, these houses are a dime a dozen. Not really, but also really. They, you know, it's the colonial design in all its various versions. You know, you have very specific design that we are used to. To see one of these houses someplace that's not the East Coast, it looks weird. Just like seeing like a house with terracotta and stucco looks weird here. It's, you know, it's very much a time and place. So next time we will pick up on the earliest American quilts. So like I said, I apologize today, guys. I can't do the full 2 hours. The snow must be dealt with. So with that, I'm gonna go. But remember, I will not be here on Thursday. And again, nothing's wrong, nothing's bad. I need that day. My husband and I need that day to get some stuff taken care of. But I will be back next Monday. And of course, Jill and I will be on YouTube tomorrow for Quilt Nerding. If you follow us there. Yeah. Quiltish got a foot of snow. Yeah. Oh no, Kenny. Snow but no shovel. Well, you know what? When life gives you snow, make snow angels. Who cares about shoveling it? Yeah, I think, Quiltish, I think I have maybe a little less than a foot. They said 6.5 inches, but I think it's deeper than that. Made ice cream. Yes, I think. Didn't you post that on Instagram? I think I saw that. I saw a few people were doing the old, like, out in the snow ice cream. Yeah. Oh, it's cold outside. Your 404 is threaded. Oh, say no more, Kenny. Say no more. All right, guys. I will see you next week. Unless, you know, you're a quilt nerding follower, in which case I'll see you tomorrow. Yeah. So stay warm. Stay safe. If you've got to shovel snow like me, be a weenie because you don't want to hurt yourself. I'm like T-Rex arms with the shovel because I'm like I haven't wrestled a quilt through a machine in a while, and so my arms are kind of puny. So I gotta go. I should have worked out for the storm. All right, guys, be good, stay warm. I will see you soon. Mwah. Bye.
Why